Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. I'm so glad you're here. If it's your first time at the channel, I hope you will consider liking and subscribing so you can be notified when I make new content like this. If it's not your first time at the channel, I would implore you to please share this broadcast with other members of the audience who are not here at the moment, because I want them to get the information I'm about to share. It's very important to every single parent of a school-age child right now. I am welcoming to my studio today a social media safety and anti-cyberbullying advocate, Rose Bronstein. You may or may not be familiar with Rose. She is the founder of Buckets Over Bullying, and she is the mother of Nate Bronstein. Nate Bronstein was a teenager who loved sports, playing the drums, and hanging out with his friends. He was destined for great things. Tragically, however, this 15-year-old Chicagoan student at Chicago Latin School died by suicide on January 13th, 2022, after facing vicious attacks, harassment, and threats of physical harm by a group of classmates and teammates over text and social media. He was sent messages like, "You should die and go kill yourself." This is a problem across all 50 states. There are similar tragic stories all over the place. You hear about them just dozens and dozens of times a month. You will see digitally connected 10 to 19-year-olds who've committed suicide after being cyberbullied inside and outside of school, and parents who feel powerless to prevent it, in part because their schools are not helping them. Their schools are not making them aware of what's going on, either in school, around school, or even outside of school that bleeds into school. That, in other words, the student comes to an administrator and says something, and they don't do anything. A growing body of real world and clinical evidence shows that the students who experience this kind of bullying face increased risk of suicidal thoughts, as well as a host of other concerns, mental illness concerns. Nate's legacy and those of other cyberbullied teens needs to be preserved. And we need to share this information broadly so people can become educated about what cyberbullying is and how to fight it. Rose has been motivated by what happened to her to help others, and I really hope you will help share her message far and wide. So without further ado, please welcome to the studio, Rose Bronstein. Hi, Rose.
Hi, Deb. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. This is a big issue. I think every parent in the audience approaches this with trepidation, because to know about it is to fear it, right?
Right. And I think, or I feel what I'm experiencing is if you are someone who has not been victimized by cyberbullying, you just don't think it's a problem.
Right.
And so I feel like I am just this one person in the Chicago area screaming from the mountaintops, this is a problem, this is an urgent crisis, we need to fix this. And parents, school administrators, legislators are just keeping their heads down, their eyes down, burying their heads in the sand and say, not my problem, it's not going to happen to my child, it's not going to happen to me, and just go about their business. I cannot find support in the Chicago area from a parental perspective, from a school perspective, to stand with me and to start to make change.
That's amazing. How big a problem is this in terms of discipline in schools? So we think about cyberbullying, and cyberbullying can happen anywhere, right? But our kids do spend most of their time in schools, and most of the people they know through school. So as far as a discipline issue that schools either are dealing with or should be dealing with, where does it rate? Where does it rank?
Right now, bullying and cyberbullying is the second largest discipline issue in the schools. In my own experience in the schools that my daughter is in, and from what I hear from other schools, administrators and guidance counselors are spending most of their day dealing with bullying and cyberbullying, trying to manage it within the four walls of their school. So they don't even have time to actually do their own jobs. They're just running around trying to be reactive to a very dangerous problem.
And what is their current protocol for dealing with it? So if it's brought to their attention, what do they do?
Well, what I do know is that it varies from school to school. And public and private obviously are different. Public schools are going to have their policies in place, and excuse me, private schools have their policies in place. So supposedly each school has to follow their own policies. And then if your state has bullying and cyberbullying laws in place, they have to follow those as well. And also it varies from state to state. So for example, in Illinois, we do have a bullying and cyberbullying policy. It was enacted in 2012. It does not really have teeth to it, and it's very unclear for, like, it's not definitive or specific, so there's a lot of room for interpretation. And schools are required to follow this policy, but they're not. They're not because either they're not aware of it, and there's nobody. I don't think that the Illinois State Board of Education is doing a good enough job holding schools accountable for not following it. And then in my particular situation, in private schools, they are required also to follow Illinois' bullying and cyberbullying policy. And in addition to that, they have a handbook with their own school policies. But what I am seeing in my own experience, they are not following their own policies. They are handling incidents of bullying and cyberbullying at their sole discretion. And that language is very heavily used in handbooks of private schools, especially those schools that are attached to the NAIS. So for example, they don't, they're not consistent in the way they handle an incident of cyberbullying. It's all based on what they think, who the child is, what the situation is. And it's become Lord of the Flies in these schools. Kids are doing horrible things, and essentially, more so in the private schools, the kids are not being held accountable. They're not.
So if you wouldn't mind, could you give us a definition, or I realize that different schools have different policies, but so the audience can have one working definition of cyberbullying. If it's multiple things, in other words, if there are different kinds of behaviors, that's fine. Just so we can have a sense of the sort of range and scope of behaviors that administrators are exercising sole discretion over.
You mean, how would I define cyberbullying in general?
Yeah, or if there's not an official one, an official definition, like from the legislation, for example, what are you seeing? How would you define it? We just need a working definition for this conversation so the audience can understand what we're talking about in terms of what their response is to it.
And that's interesting too, because there isn't a global legal definition of cyberbullying that spans, for example, across the country, because we don't have federal legislation to protect our kids. So it varies from state to state. If you go to different websites, it varies what their definition is. Illinois' bullying statute is going to have their own definition of bullying and cyberbullying versus Indiana, Ohio. It's fascinating yet very disturbing. I mean, the cyberbullying is anything that is an imbalance of power from peer to peer. It only has to be one isolated incident. It doesn't have to be a repeated pattern because, for example, one child can tell another child, go kill yourself. And what if that child who's on the receiving end of that message goes ahead and acts on that? Then what? There are people who say that the pattern needs to be repeated, the behavior needs to be repeated. I don't think that qualifies. Anything that is posted on social media, on the internet, that is an attack, that's an insult, exclusion. We've been talking about this a lot. You know, when kids go on text messages and they're in a group chat, and then they deliberately pull one child out of that text message to alienate them, that is considered cyberbullying.
So it's like relational bullying, but in a digital way. So,
Space.
and it's interesting because the behaviors that you're talking about, we would recognize instantly as a form of bullying if they were happening in real life.
Correct.
So if we saw a group of friends standing around together and we saw them physically remove one of them from the group and say, get out of here, and shove that kid outside the group and say, you can't be with us anymore. Now, we would recognize that as that's cruel. Like that's just, a kind of bullying. And then same thing, if we saw a person say, go kill yourself, if we witnessed it, we wouldn't hesitate to call that bullying. But when it happens in the digital space, what I've heard is, and I've seen on social media, I've seen people be fairly callous and say things like, well, it's just words. Or, what about, I was brutalized, but, I was bullied and it made me stronger. I was this, I was that. And I don't think that people really understand that things actually seem to intensify for the person. It's not just children either, even adults. They intensify through the digital medium, don't they?
They do, because everyone is in front of their phones and they're not seeing a human face in front of them. And
Right.
so what happens is the empathy gets diminished, because when you insult someone or send them a derogatory remark or threaten them with physical or deadly harm, you're not seeing a reaction because you're looking at a screen. So the children who are doing this feel that they can just shoot these words out into the digital space, and because they're not seeing a person, the empathy drops to absolutely nothing. And
Right.
for some reason, they've been conditioned to think that this is okay. And it's
Right.
not. You're absolutely right. If 4 kids are sitting at a lunch table at school and a 5th child walks up and says, can I sit with you? And the kids say, no, get out of here. That's bullying. And it's applied on these text messages or on these Snapchat threads when kids are kicking another child off of a group chat or making their own group chat to alienate the other child. It's the same exact behaviors, just in the digital space. And what's really frustrating for me to see is that parents whose children are the perpetrators of this are not owning up to their own child's behavior. So something that I've experienced a lot, and I've heard from other parents whose children have been victimized, or other parent survivors like myself. Like, for example, in my situation, when I gave notice to parents in my community, the school committee, when my child was being bullied, and I say, my child, your son is hurting my child. Can you please do something? Really? Not my Johnny. My Johnny would never do anything like that. I asked my Johnny, and he said that he's not doing anything to your child. My child is an angel. That is like the instinctive response. No parent wants to look inward and think, you know what? I've been told that my child is doing something wrong. I need to look at their phone. I need to look into it. What happened? I need to make it stop. The kids who are the perpetrators are lying to their own parents and telling them that they're not doing it, when in reality that they are. And that happens to a lot of parents like myself. I was at my wit's end, hysterical, trying to help my son, trying to get this to stop. And when I approached parents by phone, in person, say, your child is hurting my son, this needs to stop, they literally would look at me and not do anything. Or they'd say to me, what do you want me to do? And I'd say, well, you're the parent, take care of it.
They pay for the phone.
They pay
I
for
mean, it's their property. It's literally their property. They have every right to just literally take it away, check the history, turn off the access to text and social media. They can even ask to see, from you. They can say, I want to get to the bottom of this. Do you mind sharing with me if you have any screenshots or copies of the messages? They don't have to be antagonistic, like prove it, but they can just say, would you share it with me? Because their child might have deleted it. Like, acknowledge that this could have happened. Your kid knows how to clear their history and delete things all day long. So if it were happening to me, I'd say, I want to be able to go to my child with receipts. Can you give me the examples if you have them? If you don't have them, okay, but I'll go talk to them. But if you have them, it's going to be a better and easier conversation, right? To me, here it is. Kiddo, you did this. I personally can't wrap my mind around a parent who doesn't want to raise a decent human being and a socially responsible human being. You can love your child and even forgive your child and guide them in the right way to behave. No one's saying to the parent, like, go beat your child. You're just saying, what if your kid did do that? Don't you want to stop them? I would be horrified. I'd be mortified. I'd be like, I want to put a stop to this immediately because that is not what I want from my child. I think a lot of parents take it, like, internalize it, like, I'm a bad parent. It's not about being a good parent or a bad parent. It's just about being a parent, period.
Right.
And there are certain behaviors that equate to parenting, and there's certain ones that don't. You're not there to be your child's best buddy.
No.
Or to be judged good parent because everything looks good on the surface to imaginary friends. This is a human that you're, like, bringing up, right?
Yeah.
I don't get that at all.
These parents are handing their children cell phones with no rules, no boundaries, no expectations. And essentially, cell phones have become weapons of mass destruction. You cannot hand your child, a fifth grader, a sixth grader. Now I'm hearing children as young as fourth grade are getting cell phones with access to social media, access to the internet that's completely unmonitored and unregulated, without any rules and without any consequences. And that is exactly what is happening. There are so many parents that I've approached and who have said to me, I don't know what my kids are doing on social media. I stay out of it. Well, you know what? That's extremely negligent and extremely dangerous. And I don't think that parents are seeing that giving their child a technological device with free reign, with no boundaries, is going to lead to destructive results. It's happening over and over and over again. Every week I see another news report of another child taking their life, and 95% of the time it is due to bullying and or cyberbullying. And I don't understand how many more children have to be lost tragically from bullying and cyberbullying. Like, what is it going to take for parents to wake up and realize that this is an epidemic and that handing our children cell phones without rules and boundaries is just dangerous?
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit, because as I said, there are probably people out there who are going to say, well, isn't bullying? What do the clinical studies say about the risk to a child who is on the receiving end of digital or cyberbullying versus in-person bullying?
The latest studies are showing that children who are cyberbullied are 4 times more likely to attempt self-harm and or suicide. And those numbers keep rising.
And where does suicide rank in terms of the cause of death of this age range, school-age children, like 10 to 19?
Second leading cause of death is suicide for children ages 10 to 19. And what data is showing, this has started to increase around 2007, and that's when the iPhone came out, and that's when social media platforms started to come out. So the trend of suicide is going up year over year as the years go by, with the introduction of the phone and with the social media platforms. So there's so much research and data out there to confirm this. Like, we don't need any more of it. It's out there, and the tragedies keep happening. I don't know, what else we need to have open our parents' eyes to this epidemic. And if we don't start to come together and create a disruption and demand change, this is just going to keep getting worse and worse. I don't know how much more worse it can get already, but it's just going to continue to get worse.
Now, what are some of the things I've talked in the channel before about how, if you put a phone in your kid's hands, guaranteed they're seeing porn. I mean, it's like, somebody asked me once, well, what's the proper age to give my child a smartphone, I'm like, when you want them to see porn. Like when you think they're old enough to see porn, that's about the age. So that's probably not till what, 18, 20, I don't know. But that's for sure. But what else are they seeing? What else? See, I think even when parents think of, well, I can't wrap my brain around the cyberbullying. How about all the other stuff that could be causing them psychological harm? What else are they seeing, Rose?
Real life violence, hate speech, um, the platforms like Snapchat and Instagram are creating body dysmorphia for children because the algorithms are feeding them information about weight loss, about looking skinny. What else? I think I covered the big ones. There's a lot of sextortion going on online with kids. There are predators online looking to traffic kids, sex trafficking, human trafficking. Our children are being exposed to this day after day. Also, the sale of drugs. I'm sure everyone has heard with the fentanyl crisis that's going on in our country. Drug dealers are on Snapchat, they're on Instagram. They're looking for our children. They are looking to sell them pills, everything from Xanax to Oxycontin to Adderall, and they are laced with fentanyl, and they are being delivered to our children in their homes. Children are taking the pills and they are losing their lives because they are laced with fentanyl.
Unbelievable.
And the social media platforms are doing nothing to prevent this. They are doing nothing to put the highest level of safety settings on these platforms to protect our children. It's the Wild West. It's like, imagine no parent would drop their child off. For example, we would never drop our infant off at a daycare center without daycare helpers, right? Without adults taking care of our babies. The analogy is the same. We're just giving our kids cell phones and access to the internet with no adults in there monitoring them or making sure that they're safe.
Right. And even if we wanted to say, okay, it's hard for the social media companies because people then lie and kids lie and things like that. I still think there's something to be said for, putting it in the hands of the adults who are closest to the children. And that's not just the parents, it's also teachers and administrators if they go to school. And the reason I say that is that increasingly schools are using technology. They're making it practically a requirement for parents to give their kids smartphones. So whereas even just 5 years ago, you could have been that parent who said, I don't care if you hate me, you're having a flip phone, or I don't care if, you think I'm the most old fashioned parent in the world, you don't get your own phone until you're, a senior in high school, whatever. You could probably get away with that. And then the schools started saying, we're doing everything through Class Dojo, and we're using Canva, and we're Canvas, and we're using Google Classroom, and we're using this and that and the other, and Zoom, and of course, COVID. And I think a lot of parents, especially during the COVID lockdowns, caved in or felt pressured to put their kids in front of technology because it was the only way they could even interact with their teachers in their schools. I mean, would you agree that that's most parents are kind of betwixt and between, like rock, hard place, me? What do I do?
100%. Because if you're the last parent whose child in the classroom does not have a phone, all you're doing is alienating them socially and academically, because I'm sure we all feel this. Kids communicate via text message about homework. They have group chats. My daughter has a group chat for her geometry class on the phone, right? So if we're stuck. If the child comes home and says, I'm being isolated, I don't know what's going on socially. There's text messages about homework. It's spiraled to this place where everyone has lost control over it. Parents have lost control. The schools have done nothing to put safeguards in place to protect our children. And because they're online, not only in school on school devices, coupled with their own, it's 8-9 hours a day of access to technology. And kids are, whether they're using the school device or their own device, and even with this, they're still apt to being harmed. Some things that I've been talking about with some schools in our area last week, and I know that this is something that it would be really difficult to implement, but it's one thing that I feel strongly about is that as parents, we need to start to pressure our school communities to eliminate cell phones from the school day, period. There should be no phones, no personal digital devices on any child from the minute they walk in at 8 in the morning until the minute they leave the school at 3:30. I have seen articles and read stories about schools around the country individually doing so by their principals. And the children who have been a part of this have anecdotally reported back that eliminating access to their digital devices and eliminating access to Snapchat and the text messages has reduced their anxiety levels, has reduced their stress levels, and have made their school day a lot more peaceful and a lot more productive.
That's right.
And there are schools in the country who've also started to use those pouches. I don't know if you've ever seen those pouches, like if you go to a concert or comedy show, they make you put your phone inside a pouch and it's sealed. There are schools who've implemented that as well as like the best safeguard you can do right now to at least pull some of that access to the digital world away from our kids so they can focus on their studies, they can focus in class, and they can have human interaction with each other and not worry about where their next Snapchat text is coming from or who's on Instagram doing what and what the plans are after school and not being included, right? At least this way they can start to focus on their studies. This would also alleviate a lot of the problems that administrators are having day in and day out at schools. But it has to come from the parent community. Parents have to unite and have to all be on the same page and be committed to doing this. If not, this is never going to go away. And as kids are getting cell phones at a younger and younger age, it's just snowballing.
Right. And you know what, I as I'm listening to you and thinking about the problem, what occurs to me, especially when people say, well, they just shouldn't pay attention to it or they shouldn't care, or it's only words or things like that. Or why would it raise your anxiety? And then I want to say to them as adults, like, really? When your phone is blowing up and going ping, 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 ping throughout the day, it doesn't raise your blood pressure? I know it does mine. I have to put on do not disturb after a certain amount of time because it absolutely does make my heart beat faster. I'm an adult. I know, like, I've lived long enough to be able to intellectually put things in perspective, and it still has like it gives me a physiological reaction. Now imagine being a rapidly developing child.
Correct.
So their brain is developing super fast, their nervous system, everything is still in growing phase. And they're brand new on the planet. So they're learning how to exist in this weird place called Earth, and how human beings interact. And I really, I'm going to run something by you. Tell me what you think. I think that we have forgotten as adults, and especially it seems administrators have forgotten in schools, what it was like to be a kid. It's almost like the more we know about child development and brain science, the less we know. Like, we've forgotten it all. We've forgotten that they're not miniature adults. And even adults have problems with this. They're going to take something like a single text that says kill yourself. It doesn't mean the same to a kid. And it won't mean to take 10 kids and line them up. And it won't mean the same to each of those 10 kids because they're even individually at different places in their psychosocial development. And the thing they talk about all the time in school, social and emotional learning. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Usually that comes from being with your peers, right? It comes from playing and going outside and hanging out with people and your family and going to family gatherings and going to a party. Well, what happened in 2 years of their lives? But more than 2 years for some of them, in a part of their life that was so important for them to develop those skills of reading people's expressions and tones and what they should care about and what they shouldn't care about, they had no access to other people. The only access they had was digital, and digital is very bad at giving us those pieces of information, what we call micro expressions, like a tone of voice or a little facial expression that let you know that someone's joking or sarcastic or they're teasing you or whatever, or they're just being a jerk. And even, if somebody is nasty to you, but you see their, RBF or whatever, it is actually easier to be like, I don't care what you're saying, than when it's just words on a screen. And our kids didn't get this development. They didn't get that time. And then the schools talk all the time of we have to teach them and teach them and teach them. No, you can't teach somebody how to be better at something while allowing them to be bad at it so much. So as long as they keep letting them have access to the phone, there's nothing in a classroom that's going to overcome that. I don't even think, not that I agree with SEL in the classroom, but even let's say it did what they claimed it did, it's not going to work until they take the phones away.
Exactly.
You can't have the two things going on at the same time because they work at cross purposes. You're not going to learn empathy while you're busy abusing people or being abused. You're going to feel, in fact, I would think as a kid, how much empathy do you have for me, teacher, principal, headmaster, etc., if you're allowing these kids to beat up on me? I don't believe you anymore. I don't believe you care.
They don't. That's exactly what kids are thinking, especially those who are being victimized. They are at the point where they don't think that if they go and ask for help, they're going to get help. So they choose to internalize it and hold on to it because they think if I go tell an adult, these children who are attacking me are going to retaliate more. It's going to make it worse for me. I'm going to be humiliated more. See, adults in the room are not handling it correctly, or they are gaslighting our children. This is what happened to my son. They are gaslighting the children and saying to them, no, this is not considered bullying or cyberbullying. We'll see you later. There's the door. And so the child doesn't feel heard and is feeling helpless and is saying to themselves, well, I went to an adult, they didn't make it better, so there's nothing I can do. And this happens all the time. This just happened recently at my child's school. A child was attacked, was physically beaten up in the school, and it was videoed and it was put online. And the child did not notify their parent because they were afraid that it was going to make it worse for them. So the parent didn't find out for 2 months. It took 2 months for the parent to find out that their child was being attacked. This happened in my case as well. My son went to the dean of students. He reported a cyberbullying incident, and he never came and told my husband and I. And in retrospect, I now understand why. Because he thought if he would have told us, we would have taken action. He was probably afraid that we'd say, we're going to take away your phone. We're going to shut down your social media. I'm going to call the parents of the kids. And what that happens is it makes it worse for the victim. Because every time, and I see this over and over again, this happened again in my situation, when I reached out to parents whose children were bothering my son, and I would say to them, please do not tell your child that I reached out to you because I don't want to make it worse for my child. And my child has asked me, please don't call any parents. Well, guess what happens? The very next day, my son showed up at school and he's being teased and mocked at school because the perpetrators found out that I called their parents. And then my son came home to me crying, saying, why are you calling parents? You just made it worse for me. So not only do you have the child perpetrator to deal with, you don't have the parents, they don't have your back. They're not with you and trying to solve the problem, make it better for anybody. I actually felt betrayed and stabbed in the back because I was calling other parents to say, I need your help. We got to make this stop. And all they did was make it worse. And then when I approached them about that, saying you made it worse for my child, then they deny it. It's like this vicious cycle. There's no way to break it until all parents wake up, parents of perpetrators and parents of children who are being victimized. And we come together and start to shift the way this is being handled to help our children. This is for our children.
Right. Right. And as you point out, even if it's not literally happening to your kid directly, the odds that your child is in the middle somewhere of one of these interactions, right? Either it's happening to someone they care about and they're helpless to help them, or they're friends with someone who's doing it and they don't know what to do. They're like a bystander, but they want to be an upstander, but they're scared that they're going to be the next victim.
They're scared of retaliation. Yep.
I've been in that situation as an adult where I was in the receiving end of harassment and people I knew saw it happening and they saw it and they were like, well, I don't want to say anything or call attention to myself because then that person's going to turn on me. Exactly. And I'm like, wow, way to be a loyal friend. Right. So, but again, adults ought to know better. Kids have no wherewithal to figure out what to do there. That's like a horrible situation. And then if something happens to one of their friends, they carry around this guilt. So this hurts everybody.
Everybody. I had
Everybody is hurt by this.
over 20 kids, 20 kids on this text thread where they attacked my son, and Snapchats that went around. Not a single child, and there were children who were silent, but they were on there. Not a single child reported it, saying Nate Bronstein needs help. He's being attacked. They all stayed quiet. If one child that saw what was going on had said something, I am 100% confident that my son would still be here. Just one child to say something that Nate needs help. Nate's being attacked.
Or how about the school telling you?
That's another issue. That's a huge issue. Schools our administrators are being negligent. It's misconduct on their part, and they're immune to all this. They're immune. It's impossible to.
That's something parents don't understand is the level of immunity that they have. And you mentioned to me when we talked offline that your son was worried, and all these kids are in the same tough spot that we, their parents, are in terms of, damned if I do, damned if I don't. My phone is hurting me, but don't take my phone away. When a child goes to administrator and says, somebody is hurting me and it's happening through my phone, please don't tell my parents because then they'll take my phone away. And the schools, it's that we're seeing an epidemic of this. Schools are listening to children. Schools are operating as though, well, the kids said X, so I'm going to do what the kids said. That is,
it's negligent. They're minors. There needs to be, if administrators are supposedly mandated reporters, right, across the country, they all claim, oh, I'm a mandated reporter. If I get an incident of child neglect or child abuse by law, I am required to report this. The same should apply to bullying and cyberbullying.
Agreed.
It's that black and white. Every incident of bullying and cyberbullying should be taken just as seriously as a child being neglected, a child being abused, because it's the same thing. It's abuse.
Right.
And our administrators in our schools are not taking it seriously. Our children right now are not safe within our schools because the adults in the room are not providing a duty of care that as parents we expect from our schools when we drop our children off every day, especially at private schools. Especially, we sign contracts, we pay tuition, we assume that we are getting I assumed I was getting a higher level of care and attention, and that my son was going to be even more safe because of the money that I was paying and what I was being told about how the community operates and how bullying and cyberbullying, there's a zero tolerance policy for bullying and cyberbullying, that it is not acceptable and it will not be tolerated within our community. And
they're easy words to say, but if we don't do anything,
they're lying. We are being lied to. There was a zero tolerance policy for bullying and cyberbullying, and that administrator should have called me as soon as my son left that office to say, Mrs. Bronstein, Mr. Bronstein, your child came in this afternoon to report an incident of cyberbullying. You need to come in tomorrow. We need to talk about this. We need to get this straightened out. That's what I thought I was paying for. And that is the contract that I signed. And that is what I expected from that school. So, and I know I'm switching gears a little bit. I'm not well versed in this, but this whole school choice thing, trying to implore parents to think that, private school is a better option. In my experience, in the schools that I have been that are tied to the NAIS, they are not. It is the Wild West. It is Lord of the Flies, and the administrators are not doing anything to protect our children from bullying and cyberbullying.
And for those who aren't aware, the NAIS is the National Association of Independent Schools. They are, I believe, the largest accrediting association for private schools. Most of your better private schools all over the country are NAIS members. But if your school is not NAIS or you're looking at you're not safe because the other ones are just as bad, COGIA, et cetera. They are all of a sort. It's not just NAIS. It's the way those accrediting groups function. There's no transparency.
No
It's hard to know if you're in a private school who's on the board, like, who's on the board, but how they got there, how'd they get on the board, who votes for them, how do you get rid of somebody who's not doing a good job, how do you even reach them? It's like skull and bones at this point, how these schools are run. And I think parents who aren't in private schools but are clamoring for school choice so they can get their kids into private school have this illusion that all will be well. My child will be physically safe. They'll have better academics. There'll be more transparency. I'll be the customer.
It's a
Actually,
lie.
you're not.
It's a lie. And what's even more frustrating too for me watching all this unravel is that the schools are so focused on the narrative that this is a mental health issue. And so when a child self-harms or takes their own life, the narrative has become victim blaming the child. Yep. That this is the child's fault. The child had mental health problems. The child was troubled. The child was, a bad kid. Instead of saying, going to the root of the problem, why are so many children self-harming and taking their lives? What is the root cause? The root cause is addictive social media, digital phones that are weapons of mass destruction, and they're in an unmonitored environment where nobody is putting the safeguards in place for our children, and nobody is stepping up and saying, okay, here's what we all need to do to keep our children safe. It all goes back to this blanketed mental health statement. We have a mental health crisis in our society and kids are hurting themselves, and we have to keep pumping mental health workshops and mental health discussions. But how about the cause? How about talking to kids about bullying is dangerous, cyberbullying is dangerous, empathy is super important, especially when you're online. How about monitoring, thinking before you text, thinking before you post, parents sitting down with their children at home and saying, before I hand you this cell phone, these are the things you can and cannot do online. Right. The analogy that I am constantly thinking about too is like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I'm a child of the 80s. Mothers Against Driving was born because of so many children and teens losing their lives to driving while drunk. And there was a huge movement to put a stop to it, right? And they knew the cause, drinking and driving. The same thing needs to be applied here. We have to teach our children, you have a cell phone, you have a responsibility to act, to behave a certain way, to be a good digital citizen online, because if you don't, you are in a position to harm somebody. Somebody will be harmed.
Well, the other thing, I saw the most recent Chris Rock routine, which I didn't love, but there was one thing he said that stood out to me. He said the addiction of this generation right now is attention. We're addicted to attention.
The likes, the shares.
Yeah. So all that, it is addictive. And we know this. There's a dopamine rush. They've measured this. There's a dopamine rush for this little micro dopamine rush. And after a while, you need more and more and more and more, like anything else, whether you're eating junk food. And so one of the challenges with when you make it's a mental health problem, and we need to have a workshop, we need to have this, is the same people who bully because they have this insatiable need for attention. Correct. It's not the people like Nate who have that. It's not the victims, generally speaking. It's the perpetrators that have this insatiable need to be dominant and be in the sucking up the oxygen in the room, so to speak. I'm in charge. I'm getting the attention. When you put the spotlight on people to say, what's your victimhood? Like, what's your mental health problem? These same people who are victimizing will be the first ones up at bat going, oh, let me tell you about my trauma. Right. And they suck up the oxygen in that room too. The kids who are least likely to tell you something's wrong, I need help, I'm depressed, I'm suicidal, I don't want to be here anymore, are the ones who fly below the radar. They're not looking for attention. They're not addicted to likes and shares. They just want to play basketball and go to school and hang out with their family and whatever. They pretty much want to be left alone with the exception of their friends and their family. And they're not addicted to attention, and they can't quite find a niche in this world where that's what it is. When we were growing up, the popular kids that existed, but there were pockets of quiet and space to even not fit into any of it, to just be like a loner. But in the digital age, there is no space. There's no quiet. There's nowhere to hide. It's
Correct.
24/7.
24/7.
Everywhere you go, the evidence lasts forever. You feel like you can't escape and you can't just go get away from everybody. And worst of all, you then go to school and they turn the Klieg lights on you and go, "So how's everything going?" And the kid's like, can we not, please? Can I just have 5 moments of peace to get my head around this? And they don't have it.
They
And
don't
those
have
same
it.
administrators that want to sit there and pry into, and like tinker around in their brains about their mental health will look at you like, mental health, what? What? Oh, there's no problem. This is fine. This is all fine. What? So there's mixed messages like crazy coming out. Oh, mental health is the most important thing. I'm being bullied. Yeah, that's not really bullying.
Right. That's exactly what's happening. So they're screaming that everyone has to look out for each other and look out for their mental health. And schools are bringing in organizations that talk about signs to look for when your friend is suicidal. Really, you're putting that on the children?
Really? Right? Exactly.
Versus, okay, we are going to sit down and we're going to have a discussion on cyber safety education. That is so critical. And it just turns my insides to know that there are so many schools who are not incorporating cyber safety education into their curriculum. And if they are, they're just checking off a box because they've been told to, or they're not bringing in expert-led, credible organizations with meaningful and serious content that really, really resonates with the kids to make for that light bulb to go over the head and like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that pulling someone out of a Snapchat thread is cyberbullying, right?
Exactly. Are you familiar with the movie Screenagers?
I have not seen it, but I have heard about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of an example of something where the school undertakes to take it so seriously that they, as you point out, start bringing in people who, I believe there's a doctor behind that, who spent a lot of time studying cyberbullying and the effects of, and made a film, as you point out, to engage the students and reach them where they are and to say, like, here's what's happening. This is what happens. Another movie that I watched, I don't know how I saw that. I think it was on like one of the streaming services a few years back. Came across it with my eldest daughter. And I think it was called The Social. I'll have to find it. But it was about this. But it was a dramatized. It was like it wasn't made for TV quality. It was like a movie, but it was about a girl who first wants to be popular. Like she kind of wants to be in that crowd. So she joins in on the social media thing. But as often happens, one person turns on you or something, they take you out of that chat and her life blew up. I mean, it just went so haywire so fast that she went from being basically a happy-go-lucky kid and everything was fine to being suicidal in such a short period of time. Her parents had whiplash. Like, what happened? And they weren't aware of any of it going on because it happened so quickly.
Right.
In that case, it was on a computer, not a phone. The movie's a little bit older. But what I loved about it was after she gets rescued, but then she goes for therapy and she goes to a group to describe what's going on and whatever. And when she ends up back at school and she sees it happening again, she stands up and she speaks out and she says something to the group of kids standing around. And it was really moving to hear her, from a teenager's perspective, explain what was going on. I was here and I did this. And she like almost was a bully for a little while until they turned on her. So she had been on both sides of this. And it was really good. And I think when I watched it with my daughter intentionally, I said, I want you to watch this film and let me know your thoughts. And it really hit home. She said, I get it. That's wow.
Right.
Seeing it that way, and watching it happen to other people and getting to see like their inner life and somebody else's inner life. She said she would never look at it the same way again. She's like, I'm never going to look at how I use my phone the same. So I think these are things schools should do. It's not even a can do. They should be doing it. They should be looking for this all the time.
It should be required by law. There should be federal legislation across the country requiring cyber safety education for every child in the country. And it's very frustrating. There are states like a friend of mine in Indiana who's also a parent survivor. Her child was harmed by the choking challenge. I don't know. I don't remember what social media platform he was on, but she lost her child to the choking challenge on social media, and she decided that she wanted to work with her legislators this year to require social media safety programming in all schools, and she couldn't get it to move. And who knows what the political reasons are behind that, but so many other topics are required in our schools: health education, sex education, physical, PE. Why is cyber safety education not a requirement at this point in time? Especially so many kids are being harmed. So, and parents as well. Parents need to get their head out of the sand and start to understand what and how harmful the phone and the iPads and the social media platforms are to our children, and start to have conversations in the home with them from the time they are handed the first cell phone and consistently throughout. Just another analogy that we were talking about last week with some colleagues of mine is from when the time our children are really young and they get into the car, we say, buckle your seatbelt, right? When they're 3, 4, 5, 6, we keep saying, get in the car. The first thing you do is buckle your seatbelt, right? So by the time they're 16, 17, and they're starting to drive, we don't have to tell them anymore because they automatically buckle their seatbelt. The same thing applies to the digital world. We need to teach them to start to buckle their seatbelt. No one else is doing it for us. The social media platforms aren't doing it. The schools aren't doing it. The kids don't know they need to do it. So right now, until this mess gets straightened out, it's up to us as parents to start to teach our children that we need to help teach them how to buckle their seatbelts when they are online. And what does that look like? What is the proper way to behave online, and what is the improper way to behave online? And when you see violence, cyberbullying, hate speech, how do you react to that? How do you handle it? What do you do? And those conversations are not being had, and that is what is leading to these horrible tragedies.
Well, you mentioned that it should be required by law, and I keep coming back to your original idea of getting the phones out of the schools, and I really think I personally prefer that to a law, and here's why. Problem with passing laws is then you've got these mandates to spend money, right?
Right.
And once you have mandates to spend money, then you've got grifters who come in and want to be on the receiving end of that money. And as we've seen, they will redefine the definition of cyberbullying. They'll redefine whatever they have to redefine to make it profitable for them to sell a product into the schools. So I'm more wary than I've ever been of legislation that places a mandate to teach a subject, because it tends to not be done well, and it just is a honeypot for grifters. Whereas your idea to say, no, this is not necessary to teach K-12. It's absolutely not. I mean, we put a man on the moon without computers in every home. The people who put the man on the moon never owned a desktop computer. We barely had we didn't have anything that's powerful in the lunar module. Okay. So nobody can justify that. And they can sit and say, well, 21st century skills, blah, blah. I have news for you. If a 4-year-old can learn to use one of these devices, which we all know they can, tragically, in like 5 minutes, they don't need to have it 8 hours a day, 9 months out of the year in a school away from mom and dad with questionable things going on, where they're not ready to receive everything that this can deliver to their face. So I think that's the fight. That's the hill that I personally want to join you on, as far as, where do we go? Like, where do I plant my sign? Because I cannot conceive of a school that can't function without cell phones in every kid's hand. That's ridiculous.
Well, it's gotten to that point. It's that out of control. And it has to come from the parents. Like, the other thing too, I think that would be helpful is for the parent community to come together and everyone agree. And whether it's like in the school policy or a parental contract among the parents and administrators, that all parents agree not to give their children access to a cell phone and or social media until like a certain age, right? And
Right.
again, that would vary, but same thing. There are laws in place. Children don't get the driver's license until they're 16. Again, the numbers are going to be arbitrary, but society in general decided that 16-year-olds are at a point where we all feel that they are capable of managing themselves behind the wheel of a car. Cars are weapons. Cars are dangerous. And they go through all these different steps of training, education, safety. Parents say, you know, don't drink and drive, don't text and drive, put on your seatbelt. You know, that's become the societal norm. The same thing needs to be applied to cell phones in the school and access to social media, or again, we are never going to get anywhere. So if parents can come together for the safety of our children and our well-being and say, in our school, no child gets a cell phone, let's just say until the 9th grade, right? Nobody gets a cell phone in our school community until the 9th grade, and no one gets access to social media until the 9th grade. I mean, that right in itself will start to shift everything and start to move the needle and we would see change in our kids' behavior, our kids' mental health, the way that our kids experience school on a day-to-day basis. It would start to alleviate all of these dangers that we're faced day to day.
The way they make friends, all of it.
Everything, right. And for the parents who say, well, what if I need to get a hold of my child during the school day? You know what? We survived. There was an emergency. The parent calls the school main office, and the main office gets a hold of the child and brings the child to the office, and it gets taken care of. Anything is doable. And I know that there are parents out there who would be taken aback at these ideas, but at this point, this is all we have. We can't rely on anyone else right now. The legislators are too slow. They are, politics is just gross in general, but asking them to come together to put legislation in place to protect our children is going to take a very long time. It's not a quick process. There's a lot of negotiating. There's a lot of back and forth. You've got big tech, who is so powerful and in the pocket and feeding the pockets of our legislators we can't sit around and wait for laws to be passed. I'm hoping and I am optimistic that there will be some federal legislation to come through to start to put the accountability on platforms, Snapchat and Instagram, just hold them accountable for the dangers that they are putting our kids in. But in the meantime, as parents, we need to start to act and be proactive in keeping our kids safe.
I agree. Well, I think what you're doing is wonderful, and I hope those in the audience watching this will be motivated to join you and help you. And so to that end, your website, let me see if I can find it. So Buckets Over Bullying. What can people do? So they can go to the website and you can take a pledge, right?
So our goal was just to start to raise awareness to both parents and children on how dangerous phones are and how dangerous it is to be on social media if you don't behave ethically and respectfully online. So we've asked people to come to our website and take a pledge to not use your device as a weapon. And that message, we feel, should be strong enough and compelling enough to make every digital citizen in this country aware that they need to behave respectfully online. Right. So that's part one. Part two, our goal is education. I'm working tirelessly here in Illinois to bring credible, expert-led cyber safety education into the schools. And we've partnered with an organization in California called the Organization for Social Media Safety. And they do a tremendous job in working with students and parents in their schools to teach them about the harms that their children could potentially be exposed to while they're online. And then I'm focused on legislation here in Illinois, trying to have some legislation pieces passed to put safeguards in place that protect our children and to also put more accountability on our schools uh, uh, to make sure that when we drop our child off at school every day, that we know that they're safe and they're going to be taken care of. We don't really have that right now.
No.
And I'm also a huge advocate for federal legislation, anything that could start to move the needle, to start to put the accountability on social media platforms, so that when our children are on it, or we know that it's being monitored. There was a piece of legislation that kind of fell off last year called KOSA, KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. And the purpose of that piece of legislation is to start to hold social media platforms accountable, forcing them to put the highest settings, default settings, like the highest levels of default settings for our kids, to allow third party auditors to come in and review their platforms once a year to make sure that they are following their own policies on keeping our kids safe. Also with and there's something in there about privacy. We need to start to put those pieces of legislation in place to protect our kids, just like we would with anything else. If for example, a baby product, God forbid, there's a problem with a baby car seat. The minute it injures a child, it gets recalled, it gets pulled off the shelf. You get alerts, right? And the company who made the car seat takes responsibility and tries to fix the situation. The same thing needs to be applied to Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all these platforms. And right now, there's nothing in place to hold them accountable.
Right.
And then finally, the last thing that I'm working on here in Illinois is unfortunately, because of the way the situation is now, is legal action. I've had many parents across the state seek out me and my husband, parents who are at their wits' end, hysterical, because they don't know how to protect their children who are being victimized. They've gone to the school. They've reported to the platform that their child is being abused. They've gone to the parents whose children are victimizing their child, and they can't get it to stop. So what we need right now is legal support, legal aid for parents to go to and to get help from a lawyer to help their child, because right now there's nothing in place. So that's what we're working on as well.
Well, it's not enough to say to the parents of the child who's being bullied, well, then just take their phone away so they can't see that they're being bullied. Right. Really?
Yeah.
The kid goes to school with the kids who are literally organizing against them using their phones. And now it's almost worse. The kid doesn't know what's coming.
Right.
So they're afraid to go to the bathroom. They're afraid to walk down the hall. They're afraid to go to class. They have like stomach aches and anxiety attacks, and because now they're in the dark.
Right.
So like I said, if you are tempted, if any of you listening to this are tempted to say, not my problem or not my kid on any side of this, I promise you, your kid is involved in this one way or the other on some side of this, and they may flip and flop and flip 10 more times in the course of their school experience. When we have, 80% of students are self-reporting that they've been a bystander to this bullying.
Correct.
You've got 90% who have seen videos of real life violence. They are self-reporting seeing hate speech and bullying. 90%. And your kid is part of this.
And they've become like immune to it, for lack of a better word. They just pass right by it. It doesn't even faze them because it's normalized. They think it's normal because they don't know any differently. So hate speech, cyberbullying, violence, They see it on their phone and they just keep swiping. They don't. And so being a bystander is just as bad as being a bully. We need to teach our kids to react, to block this, and to help other children who are being attacked. That is like one of the moral values that we need to start to instill in our children.
Well, and there are two kinds of bystanders, right? There are the bystanders who are friends with the bullies and don't do anything to stop it or report it. And then there are the bystanders who are friends of the victim who may want to do something, but the victim says, please don't.
Right. She'll make it
Like,
worse for me.
you're going to make it worse. Don't tell. Real briefly, I mean, I had a situation when you were talking about parents and going to parents. I felt it because I had a situation with my middle daughter and I went to the mom in question and I called her up. I said, hi. And I'd met her. So we had a cordial relationship. And I started off benefit of the doubt that she knew nothing about it. And I said, hi, I just wanted to talk to you about the situation going on with your child and my child. And she said, I'm going to stop you right there. Like literally cut me off mid sentence. And I said, I'm sorry. And she said, is this about the situation with the phones and the text messages that were going back and forth? And I said, yes. And she said, well, I got to tell you, if your child is going to put something in a text message, that's on her. That meaning she had written something heartfelt to another kid, and the other kid took screenshots of sections of it out of context, and other people began bullying on the basis of this nice thing that she'd written, but twisted it all out of whack. And I had said, please don't put it in writing. Please don't put it, because things happen. Oh no, it'll be fine. Assume the best.
Right.
Assume the best of people, and got the worst. And the response from the parent was, well, once you put it in writing, I always tell my kids, once you put it out there, it's out there, and that's not my problem. And I said, but it's your child who did this. Your child did something truly awful.
Right.
And it was like, well, but he wouldn't have had it to do it with if your kid didn't do this. The lack of concern, the callousness.
Yep.
Just the dismissive,
not my problem.
Wore a short skirt down the street in the middle of the night. Not my problem.
So right now, the only way to remedy that and to get to these negligent parents is, in that case, if you were able to file a restraining order or a cease and desist, you went to this parent, you gave them notice, you told them your child is hurting my child, and that parent refuses to make it stop, then this is where the legal action comes in. The ability for you to file a restraining order and make it formalized in the court and out them, right, becomes public record against the parent that you gave notice to who didn't do anything with the minor, and then sending a copy to the school and being filed in a court. That's how this right now, that's the only way that this is going to stop. Until these parents who aren't doing their part learn a lesson. They don't want to be humiliated. This is the only way. They don't want to be humiliated in public. They don't want record of it. And as these children get older and they start to apply to college, and there's record of restraining orders or cease and desist against them for bullying and cyberbullying, that's going to be enough of a deterrent to get these kids to stop, because their end goal is getting into, a university or college. So if that's on their record, that's all that I can come up with right now until this mess is addressed. Yes.
Well, and finally, the last thing I want to ask you about, and I'm pretty sure I know what your answer is going to be, but discipline. When it comes to consequences, schools, all schools, public, private, every which way, seem to have abandoned the concept of consequences.
Correct.
Their idea is we'll talk to everyone involved as if they're all equals. So then you take a person who's been abused and you put them in the same room as their abuser.
Correct.
With this restorative justice nonsense, which is incredibly traumatizing for somebody who's been bullied.
And humiliating.
And it's humiliating. It's traumatizing. You're re-traumatizing them. That is the opposite of trauma-informed, everyone. So they tell you they're trauma-informed. No, they're not. That's not what you would do with an abuse victim and their abuser. So that's what they're doing. And the notion is that they're all equal and the kids are all just good at heart. Well, a child that's just good at heart wouldn't be brutalizing another child using the phone. And they do this, that's not a consequence. Or we're going to pull the kid out of school and they're going to do yoga 3 times a week. You're pulling them out of class because that'll calm them down and they won't be a bully. That's not a consequence. The consequence is you're expelled.
Correct. You do not deserve to be a part of this community if you are attacking and hurting other members of your community. And that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. They're getting a talking to or restorative justice. They have to write a paper about something, but that's not holding them accountable. So these kids think that their behavior is okay, and it's just going to repeat itself over and over and over again.
That's right. Meanwhile, if Rose Bronstein complains too much to the administration, you're the problem parent, and your children might be on the receiving end of a "we're not welcoming you back next year" letter.
Correct.
because you've complained too much. But we're going to keep the little, I'm not going to curse on the air, who is bullying people. And
Right.
this is so parents, again, if you think that private school is some kind of haven because people are paying so much money, it's not. It's
It's not.
really not.
The bullies always get to stay, and the kids who are being victimized always get pulled out and have to go to another school. And it does not remedy the situation. So all that they're doing is reinforcing the notion that the bullies did nothing wrong, and the victim is the problem, and the victim has mental health issues, and the victim is troubled, and the victim just, you know, can't make it work. They don't have thick enough skin, or, you know, they're not resilient enough, where it should be the opposite. Every child deserves the right to have it, to go to school every day and feel safe and secure and get through the day without being attacked. And that is
Not
not
everyone's going to like you, and that's fine. But there's a big difference between telling somebody, you know, everyone should love you and be your friend, and everyone should treat you with decency.
decency and respect.
Decency and respect. If you're not bothering them, the golden rule, we just need to get right back to the golden rule rules the school. And if you violate that, then game over. We shouldn't have to put everything down to the last little bullet point and define these terms. So, you know, cyberbullying versus regular bullying. It's no, if you violate the golden rule, if you do something to someone else that is in any way, you know, aggressive or harmful or totally unnecessary, that communication was unnecessary. It wasn't, hi, can you lend me the assignment, or can you tell me the assignment from class today, or what? But if their communication didn't need to happen. And I think the schools also need to stop hiding behind it didn't happen at school.
Correct.
Because we all know where these kids spend the vast majority of their waking hours. We know where it starts. We know where it picks up steam, and we know where they get the message that it's okay. And they may be getting it to a certain degree from their parents, but they're getting it more at school because there are no consequences. Nothing happens to the bullies. And what's more, it's validated when they know that the school is going to say, not our problem.
Correct. This is why I implore all parents to understand their school's bullying policies and cyberbullying policies. Make sure they have one.
Yes.
Make sure that that as a parent you understand it, and that the policies are clear, concise, and actionable. And if you're in a public school, make sure that you understand the district's bullying policies and cyberbullying policies, and make sure that they're clear, concise, and actionable. Because if they're not, or if the school isn't following their own policies, as a parent, you just, excuse my language, you're screwed. Your child is not safe.
Agreed. Rose, I cannot thank you enough for coming and talking to us today. This is such amazing information. And I will, you know, I hope everyone listening, if you're listening to this on a replay, please, you know, share it with other parents. Everybody needs this information. Nobody is immune. And we are all part of the solution. None of us can absent ourselves from solving this problem. So I thank you again for coming. Thank you for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome.